The rain had not stopped for 2 days. Thick gray clouds hung low over the town. Wind howled through the trees at the edge of the forest. The roads were wet. Most people stayed inside, warm and dry. Dan walked alone near the woods. He had spent the day fixing an old fence around his garden. Now he carried a bag of tools back to his small house on the hill. He liked quiet days. He liked being alone. But something caught his eye near the edge of the trees. There was movement under one of the large pine trees. He stopped walking. His boots sank in the wet soil. The figure under the tree looked small and weak. It was someone sitting on the ground, arms wrapped around their knees. Dan moved closer. He saw a girl. Her skin was not like any he had seen. It was a soft blue, like the sky before night. Her hair was silver and long. She wore strange clothes, torn in places and dirty from mud. Her feet were bare. She shivered in the cold wind. Dan did not ask who she was. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You'll freeze out here," he said in a calm voice. The girl looked up slowly. Her eyes were wide. They had no white, only a soft glow of purple. She said something, but it was not in his language. Her voice was soft and tired. Dan pointed to the path and said, "Come with me. My place is close." She didn't move at first. Then she nodded. Her legs were weak, but she stood up. Dan helped her walk. She leaned on him. Her body was cold. Like ice. They reached his house after 10 minutes. It was small and quiet, made of old wood and stone. Next to the house was a storage shed. Dan opened the shed door. It was dry inside. He placed a warm blanket on a wooden bench. "You can rest here," he said. The girl sat down slowly. Dan went back to the house and brought more blankets, a cup of hot soup, and dry clothes. She watched him but did not speak. He smiled, then stepped out to give her space. That night, the rain grew stronger. The wind howled louder. Dan checked on her every hour. She was awake but quiet. She drank the soup and covered herself with the blankets. In the early hours of morning, Dan returned with another cup of hot drink. The girl looked up at him and finally spoke. "My name is Lyra," she said, her words slow but clear. Dan sat on the floor across from her. He smiled again. "I'm Dan." She looked at his hands. They were rough from work. Her hands were small and smooth. She said nothing else. After a long pause, she whispered, "I'm not from here." "I know," Dan replied. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to guess. He just listened. Lyra pulled something from her pocket. It was a small round crystal, glowing softly with a warm blue light. She held it tight and closed her eyes. "Ran," she said. "I had no choice." Dan waited. He did not speak. He knew what fear looked like. He had seen it in people after storms, after loss. Lyra's voice was full of it. "They are looking for me. I can't go back," she added. Dan didn't need to know more. He stood up, walked outside, and came back with a toolbox. He started fixing the broken window in the shed. Then he added a small heater and sealed the door to stop the cold wind. Lyra watched him work. He didn't ask for her story. He didn't ask where she was from. She felt a strange peace in his silence. That night, she slept without fear. Rain stopped the next morning. The sky was still cloudy, but the sun tried to shine through. The forest smelled fresh and water dripped from the trees. Birds had returned to their songs. Dan was already outside. He chopped wood near the shed. His hands moved with skill and speed. He had lived alone for years. He was used to working in silence. But today, something felt different. Someone else was here now. Someone not from his world. Lyra stepped out of the shed. She wore a large sweater Dan had given her. It was too big for her small frame, but it kept her warm. Her silver hair was tied back. She walked slowly, still tired, but she looked better than the night before. Dan saw her and gave a small nod. He didn't speak much. He handed her a cup of hot tea and pointed to a chair near the fire pit. Lyra sat down. She watched him work. Her purple eyes followed the way he moved, strong and steady. "You live alone?" she asked. Dan nodded. "Yes." "No." "One else?" "No." She sipped the tea. It was strange to her but warm. After a short silence, she said, "Where I come from, people never live alone. It is rare." Dan looked at her, then smiled a little. "Some people like peace." Lyra lowered her eyes. "Peace is good." "I forgot what it feels like." Dan finished stacking the wood. He wiped his hands and sat across from her. "I can fix the shed more if you want to stay," he said. Lyra looked up. She didn't expect the offer so soon. Her voice was soft. "You don't even know who I am. You said your name is Lyra." She smiled for the first time. "It was small but real. I was born on a world called Zeller. It's far from here. My people are travelers. We don't stay long on one planet. But I was not just anyone. I was born in the high family. My mother was the ruler. That made me." "A princess," Dan said. Lyra nodded. "Yes, but I left them. I escaped." "Why?" Lyra looked at the fire. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "Because they wanted to control me, use me. I wanted freedom." Dan didn't push for more. He understood that kind of pain. He had left people too. His past was quiet, like a closed door. He didn't want to open it, and he wouldn't ask her to open hers. "You're safe here," he said. Lyra looked at him. Her voice was firm now. "You don't know who might come. They could find me." "Let them try," Dan said. "I know these woods better than anyone." She studied his face. He was calm but strong. She saw something in him that she hadn't seen in others. He wasn't afraid of her or of danger. That gave her comfort. Later that day, they worked together. Dan fixed the roof of the shed while Lyra cleaned the inside. She moved like someone used to fine halls and quiet gardens, not rough tools and dirt floors. But she didn't complain. She folded blankets, swept the ground, and even tried to cook something simple with Dan's help. It didn't taste perfect, but they both laughed a little when it burned at the edges. "You're not bad for someone from another world," Dan said. "And you're not bad for someone who doesn't talk much," Lyra replied. They shared a quiet moment. In that silence, something began to grow. Not love, not yet, but something like trust. A bond between two people who had lost much and found a little peace in each other's company. At night, Dan lit a small fire inside the shed. Lyra sat near it, wrapped in a thick blanket. She held a crystal in her hand. It glowed softly. "This is called a soul stone," she said. "It holds a memory from my world." Dan looked at it with interest. She continued, "When I was young, my mother gave it to me. She said it would guide me if I was lost." "Does it still work?" he asked. Lyra shook her head. "Not on Earth, but it still gives light." She placed the crystal beside her and looked up at him. "Why did you help me, Dan?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Because you needed it," he said. "No one else would have done that," she replied. Dan shrugged. "Maybe, but you looked cold. You looked alone." That was enough. Lyra felt a warmth in her chest. Not from the fire, but from the words. In her world, help often came with a price. But Dan asked for nothing. She leaned back and closed her eyes. For the first time in many days, she felt safe. Dan stood at the doorway of the shed. He watched the rain clouds moving away. Stars started to show above the trees. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight he was not alone. Morning came with a strange sound in the sky. Dan stepped outside his house and looked up. A silver light moved across the clouds, too fast and too smooth to be a plane. It made no loud noise, just a soft hum that faded quickly. Birds flew in the opposite direction. Dan stood still for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the shed. Lyra was already awake. She sat near the small fire inside. Her hands were around a warm cup of tea. She looked calm, but Dan noticed her eyes. They were alert. She had seen the light too. "They're here," she said. Dan didn't ask who. He just nodded. "You're sure?" Lyra stood up. "That was a scout ship. They use it to look for energy signals. If they're near Earth, they're close to finding me." Dan picked up a bag from the corner. Inside were tools, water bottles, and a flashlight. "I have a place," he said. "It's better than the shed. Safer." Lyra followed him without asking questions. She trusted him now. That trust was stronger than fear. They walked through the forest for almost an hour. Dan led her over hills, under low branches, across a stream. His steps were fast, but steady. Lyra kept up, even when the path grew narrow and wild. At last, they reached a hidden hill covered in moss and vines. Dan bent down and pulled away some thick plants. Underneath was a small door made of steel. He opened it and lit a lantern inside. "This was my grandfather's bunker," Dan said. "He built it during bad times, thought the world might fall apart. It never did, but he left this for us." Lyra stepped inside. The air was cool but dry. The walls were thick. There were shelves with old tools, canned food, and a water tank. A small bed was in the corner. The place felt strong, like it had waited for a moment like this. "This is perfect," she said. Dan smiled a little. "It's not royal, but it'll do." They spent the day setting things up. Dan cleaned the space while Lyra helped organize the supplies. She placed her soul stone on the shelf. Its blue light filled the room with a soft glow. That night, they sat on the floor. Lyra told Dan more about her people. "My kind live in ships and sky towers. We move from world to world, watching and learning. But not all of us agree on how to live. Some believe in freedom. Others believe in control." "You ran from the ones who believe in control," Dan said. "Yes, they wanted to use me as a symbol, make others follow them. I refused." Dan nodded slowly. "And now they want you back. They don't want me. They want power through me. If they take me, I won't return the same." Dan looked around the bunker. "Then we won't let them take you." Lyra smiled again. "You say we now. You're not alone anymore," he said. Outside, the wind picked up. The forest swayed, but inside the bunker, they were safe. Next day, Dan walked back to town to buy more supplies. He wore his usual clothes and acted like everything was normal. He didn't mention the ship or the girl in the woods, but something had changed in the town. People talked about lights in the sky. 2 men said they saw strange shapes in the trees. A woman said soldiers had come asking questions. Dan listened, but said nothing. He bought extra food, batteries, and blankets. Then he walked back to the forest. He took a longer path, just in case someone followed him. When he returned, Lyra was working on a small device. It looked broken, but gave off faint sparks. "What's that?" Dan asked. "A signal tool. Part of my old ship crashed here. If I can find it, I can repair this and call my people. Not the ones who chased me, my real people." Dan sat beside her. "Do you know where the ship is?" Lyra nodded. "Not far. I felt it last night. I think I can lead us there." "Then we'll go tomorrow," Dan said. That night Dan stayed awake while Lyra slept. He stood at the bunker door, watching the stars. His mind was full of questions. He never thought his quiet life would turn into something like this, but he didn't feel fear. He felt ready. He had built a shelter for a stranger. Now that stranger had become something more. Not just a guest. Not just a lost traveler. She had become someone who gave his life a new meaning. He turned back and walked inside. The soul stone glowed beside Lyra's bed. She breathed slowly, calm and safe. Dan knew one thing for sure. They were not running anymore. They were planning. The morning sky was dark and quiet. A low mist covered the trees, and the forest felt colder than usual. Dan packed a small bag with tools, food, and a map. He checked the batteries in the flashlight and placed Lyra's soul stone inside a cloth pouch. Lyra stood near the bunker door. She wore Dan's spare jacket and had tied her silver hair into a short braid. Her eyes were sharp and focused. "We should go before they search this part of the forest," she said. Dan nodded. "Lead the way, I'll follow." Lyra closed her eyes and held her palm over the small metal device she had repaired the night before. A soft light blinked, then turned into a steady blue glow. "It's calling to the crash. I can feel the direction." "It's northeast, near the old metal ruins," she said. Dan remembered those ruins. They were remains of a mining site, long forgotten. By the town. Nobody went there anymore. They started walking through the thick forest. Dan moved quietly, stepping over fallen logs and ducking under low branches. Lyra followed close behind. She moved fast, but her steps were light. She listened to every sound, every crack in the leaves. After 2 hours, they reached a wide clearing, filled with broken metal. Rusted beams, twisted plates, and large bolts were scattered across the land. Trees had grown between the remains. Moss covered most of it. Lyra stopped and looked around. "This is it. Part of my ship is under this ground," she said. Dan walked toward a tall bent metal wall. He knocked on it, heard a hollow echo. "It's buried deep," he said. Double quotes. "Yes. When it crashed, the earth swallowed half of it. But the signal still lives inside. I only need the core box," Lyra said. Dan pulled a folding shovel from his bag and started digging. Lyra used her hands at first, brushing away dirt and roots. After a few minutes, Dan found a hard surface. He cleared the soil and saw a silver panel. It had lines and circles that glowed faintly. Lyra touched it, and the lights became stronger. "It's still alive," she said. "Help me lift this." Together they pulled on the edge of the panel. It came loose with a loud click. Beneath it was a small case, shaped like a triangle, made of dark glass and silver metal. "This is the core box," Lyra said. She smiled. "With this, I can send a message to my people." Dan placed it gently into her bag. Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed across the clearing. It came from above the trees. A low humming noise followed. "A drone. Move," Dan said quickly. They ran toward the trees. The drone flew over the clearing, scanning the ground with a blue light. Dan and Lyra hid behind a thick tree trunk. The drone hovered, then flew lower. Lyra pulled a small metal disc from her pocket and pressed it. A soft wave of sound pushed through the air. The drone's lights blinked, then faded. It spun once, then flew away. "That will confuse it for now," Lyra whispered. Dan nodded. "We need to get back fast." They ran through the forest, keeping to the shadows. Dan knew the path well. He took a different route this time, one with more cover. Lyra followed him without question. After another hour, they reached a deep hollow in the ground. Dan led her down to a small cave, hidden by hanging roots and rocks. "We'll rest here for a while. If they tracked us, we need to wait," he said. Lyra sat down and opened the core box. She connected it to her signal device. Lights blinked. "In patterns, I need to send one short message. Then we wait for an answer," she said. Dan handed her a bottle of water. "Make it count." She nodded and tapped the device. Her fingers moved with care. The device lit up, and a soft hum filled the cave. "It's done," she said. Dan sat beside her. "How long until they reply?" "It could take 1 day or 5. It depends on how far they are," Lyra said. Dan looked out from the cave. The forest seemed quiet, but he stayed alert. Lyra leaned against the wall. "Back there in the clearing, I felt something. When I saw the ship's part, I remembered my old life." Dan turned to her. "You miss it?" "I miss parts of it. The gardens, the sky fields. but not the rules. Not the pressure, she said. Dan gave a small smile. This life is simple. Not easy, but simple. And peaceful, she added. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The forest outside grew darker as evening came. Lyra broke the silence. I never said thank you. You don't have to, Dan said. I do. You gave me shelter. You gave me trust. That means more to me than gold or stars, she said. Dan didn't answer. He just nodded. That night, they stayed in the cave. Lyra kept the signal tool close. Dan kept watch. He heard animals moving in the trees and the wind rustling the leaves, but no drones came. No voices called out. The forest held its breath. Dan felt something shift inside him, not fear, not duty. Something else. He looked at Lyra, asleep with her head resting on her bag. He had met her by chance, a girl under a tree in the rain. But now she was more than that. She was brave. She was strong. She trusted him, and he would protect her for as long as it took. Dan woke just before sunrise. The forest outside the cave was quiet. Mist hung low between the trees, and the air smelled of wet leaves and moss. He stood at the entrance, holding a stick he had sharpened the night before. His eyes scanned the trees, but he saw no movement. Lyra was still asleep. The signal tool rested near her hand, softly glowing. Dan stepped back into the cave and checked the bag. The core box was safe. Their food supply was low, but they had enough to last one more day. Lyra stirred and opened her eyes. She sat up and looked at the device. No signal yet? Dan asked. She shook her head, still silent. They shared a small meal. Dan passed her a piece of bread and a slice of dried fruit. We can go back to the bunker after this, he said. It's better hidden, Lyra nodded. Yes, but I think we'll not be waiting much longer. She was right. Just before noon, the signal device blinked with bright green light. A soft beep followed. Lyra touched the screen. A message appeared. In her native script. Dan couldn't read it, but he saw her face change. What does it say? He asked. They found me. But not the ones who chased me. These are my mother's loyal crew. They have waited for my message, she said. Dan stood up. Where are they? They're near, above Earth's orbit. They can't land near cities or they'll be noticed. But if we go to the high ridge near the mountains, they can come down for a few moments, she said. Dan thought for a moment. That's a long walk. We'll need to leave now. They packed quickly. Dan rolled the blankets and placed the signal device back in Lyra's bag. He checked the map and pointed toward the northern trail. The ridge is 4 hours away if we move fast, he said. They left the cave and entered the thick forest again. The sky was clearer now. Sunlight passed through the trees. Birds sang above them. But neither of them felt at ease. They were being hunted, and the hunters were not far behind. After 2 hours, they crossed a rocky path where the trees grew thin. In the distance, Dan saw something glinting in the sky. He raised his hand and shaded his eyes. Drone, he said. It's searching. Lyra stopped and pulled out the small sound disc. She pressed it again. A soft wave passed through the air. The drone's lights blinked. It turned and flew in the wrong direction. That won't work many more times, she said. They'll learn. Then we need to move faster, Dan said. They ran through the forest. The trees grew taller and the ground became steep. Dan helped Lyra climb a rocky slope. Her steps were slower now and her breath came heavy. Keep going, Dan said. We're close. Finally they reached the ridge. The land opened wide here. Flat stones spread across the top. Below them was a wide valley filled with trees. The sky above was blue and clear. This is the place, Lyra said. Dan looked around. We should find cover in case someone followed us. They hid behind a line of rocks and waited. Lyra tapped the device. It sent out one final signal. Minutes passed. The wind blew strong across the ridge. A few clouds floated across the sky. Then, the air changed. A low hum began, deep and soft. Dan stood and looked up. A large silver shape appeared in the sky. It had no wings, no engines. It moved smoothly, like a shadow sliding across water. "That's them," Lyra said. The ship stopped above the ridge. A round opening appeared on the bottom. 3 small figures floated down on a light beam. They touched the ground without a sound. They wore long silver suits. Their faces were covered by thin glass, but their shapes were like Lyra's, tall and slim, with smooth movements. The middle figure stepped forward. Lyra walked out from the rocks and stood tall. "I am safe," she said. "This is the one who helped me." She pointed to Dan. The 3 aliens turned toward him. They didn't speak, but one of them stepped forward and held up a hand in greeting. Lyra spoke again. "I wish to return, but not alone." The aliens looked at each other. One of them spoke in her language. The words were calm but firm. "They say it's dangerous," Lyra said. "Bringing a human might break the rules of contact." Dan stayed. Quiet. He didn't want to cause trouble. Lyra turned back to the aliens. "I was lost on a strange world. This man gave me shelter. He gave me his food, his fire, and his trust. I will not leave him behind." The aliens were silent. Then the middle one touched a device on their arm. A bright blue light scanned Dan. He stood still. "They are reading your mind," Lyra said. "They want to see if you're ready." After a moment, the light faded. The alien spoke again. "They agree," Lyra said with a soft smile. "You may come with me." Dan let out a breath. "That's good to know." The ship lowered closer to the ground. A ramp opened. Warm light shone from inside. Lyra looked at Dan. "Are you ready to leave this world?" Dan looked at the sky, the trees and the hills behind him. He had spent his whole life in silence, but now something waited beyond the stars. And someone he cared about stood beside him. "I'm ready," he said. They walked toward the ship together. The ramp closed behind them, and the silver ship rose without sound. It disappeared into the clouds, leaving only wind and silence on the ridge. The stars outside the ship were bright and silent. Dan stood near the wide glass window, staring at space. He had never left Earth before. Now he watched planets drift by and lights shine from distant suns. Everything felt new. Everything felt alive. Lyra stood beside him. She had changed into soft silver clothing that fit her perfectly. Her hair floated slightly in the low gravity of the ship. Her eyes glowed with calm joy. "Are you scared?" she asked. Dan shook his head. "Not scared. Just trying to understand all this." Lyra smiled. "You will see more soon." The ship moved through a silent gate made of light. One moment they were near Earth. The next they entered a wide part of space filled with strange colors and slow-moving stars. Ahead was a large green and blue planet with rings spinning around it. "That's my home," Lyra said. The ship began to descend. Soft music played from the walls. Dan felt a warm air rise around him. He looked out again. Floating cities drifted above the clouds. Rivers of light ran through the skies like glowing paths. Flying creatures with long wings moved gently between tall trees that reached the clouds. The ship landed near a hill covered with golden grass. A wide path stretched forward, leading to a large structure. It looked like a castle, but not like any Dan had seen. It was built of clear stone that changed color when touched by sunlight. Water flowed around it in small streams, and soft wind carried flower scents through the air. "This was my home," Lyra said. "It was empty for a long time. Now it waits for us." Dan followed her along the path. The aliens from the ship stayed behind. Lyra and Dan walked alone. As they moved closer, the gates of the palace opened by themselves. Inside, wide halls filled with soft blue light welcomed them. Tall walls were covered with glowing vines and quiet pictures from her past. Dan looked around in silence. He had no words for what he saw. Lyra turned to him. This place was once filled with people. Guards, helpers, teachers. Now only the wind walks these halls. Why is it empty? Dan asked. After I escaped, my family broke apart. Some followed the wrong leaders. Others went into hiding. Now that I'm back, they may return, she said. They walked through the halls until they reached a wide round room with a tall window facing the sky. Lyra stopped there. I want to show you something, she said. She touched the wall. It opened to reveal a staircase. They climbed it together and reached the top of the tower. From there, Dan could see the whole world. Floating islands moved gently in the air. Lights danced across the land like fireflies. A soft rainbow cloud passed by below. This is the heart of my world, Lyra said. I used to dream of running away from here. Now I'm glad I can return with someone who understands peace. Dan stood beside her. It's more than I ever imagined. They stayed there for a long time. When the stars returned to the sky, they went back inside Dot in the next days. Lyra showed Dan the hidden parts of her world. She took him to gardens that changed color with time. She showed him trees that sang when touched. He learned to walk on soft bridges made of air. He tasted fruits that held light inside them. Lyra introduced him to the few people who had stayed. Behind, they were kind and curious. They looked at Dan with wonder, but treated him with respect. Some had heard of Earth. Most had not. Dan did not speak much. He watched. He listened. He helped where he could. He fixed broken tools, cleared old paths, and cleaned dusty rooms in the palace. The people began to call him the Builder. One day, Lyra took Dan to a quiet place near a small lake. Flowers grew in perfect circles. The water was clear and still. This place is special to me, she said. I used to come here as a child when I needed to think. Dan sat beside her. It's peaceful. She looked at him for a long moment. You gave me peace when I had nothing. You gave me shelter, not just from the cold, but from fear. Dan looked at the lake. You gave me a reason to care again. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a new crystal. It was shaped like a star. It glowed with a soft green light. This is for you, she said. It holds a part of my world. If you ever return to Earth, you'll still have a piece of me with you. Dan took the crystal. He held it in both hands. Thank you, he said. Lyra smiled. You are not just a visitor. Now you are part of this world. That night, the palace lights shone brighter than ever. More people returned. News had spread that Lyra was back. Her people began to come home, one by one. Dan stood at the gates and watched them arrive. Children ran through the halls. Songs were sung in the main room. Flowers filled every corner. Lyra stood beside him. This place lives again. Dan nodded. Because you returned. No, she said. Because we both returned. He looked at her. She looked at him. They both smiled. The world around them was strange and beautiful, but in that moment, it felt like home. The days after Lyra's return grew brighter. The people who came back brought life and laughter to the palace. New voices filled the halls. Gardens bloomed with colors Dan had never seen before. The air was warm and full of hope. Dan worked alongside the people. He learned many new things, but he also taught them simple ways he knew from Earth. He showed them how to build small bridges with wood and rope. He taught them to make fire pits that kept warm without smoke. He helped fix broken tools with easy methods. Slowly, the palace became stronger and more alive. The people admired Dan. They called him the Builder. It was a title full of respect. Lyra often watched him quietly, smiling when he helped a child or shared a story. One afternoon, Lyra invited Dan to walk with her in the palace gardens. The sun was low. casting golden light on the trees and flowers. The air smelled sweet, like fresh rain on earth. "Dan," she said softly, "you changed more than this palace. You changed how my people see humans." Dan looked at her, surprised. "I never thought about that." Lyra nodded. "We thought humans were weak, simple, but you showed us strength and kindness. You built not just with your hands, but with your heart." Dan smiled. "I only did what anyone would do." "No," Lyra said, "not everyone would. You did it without asking for power or praise." They walked until they reached a small hill with a clear view of the stars. The sky was deep blue, and the first stars appeared. Dan sat on the grass. Lyra sat beside him. "Do you want to stay here?" she asked. Dan looked at the world below. It was beautiful, but strange. He thought of his small house on Earth, the trees near his garden, the rain he had seen when he first met Lyra. "I like it here," he said. "But Earth is my home." Lyra nodded. "I understand." She reached into her pocket and took out the green crystal she had given him. "This will keep you connected to us, no matter where you are." Dan held the crystal close. The next weeks passed quickly. Dan helped build new homes for those who returned. Lyra led her people to forgive old enemies and rebuild friendships. The palace became a place of hope and new beginnings. One day, Lyra received a message from her mother. The ruler of their world invited Dan and Lyra to visit the royal court. Dan was nervous. He had never been to a place like that. When they arrived, the palace was grand and full of light. People in bright clothes greeted them. The ruler sat on a high throne, watching them carefully. Lyra spoke first. "Mother, this is Dan. He saved me and gave me shelter. He helped us build a better world." The ruler looked at Dan. She nodded slowly. "You are a human. You are far from home. But you have done what few could do. You are welcome here." Dan bowed his head. He felt proud but humble. The ruler smiled. "You will have a place here. You are the first human honored in our stars." Dan looked at Lyra. She smiled back. From that day, Dan's life changed. He lived between two worlds. He visited Earth often, but he also stayed in Lyra's world. He built bridges between people, teaching and learning. He became a symbol, a proof that kindness and strength could come from anyone, no matter where they came from. One night, as Dan stood looking at Earth from the palace window, Lyra joined him. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. Dan smiled. "Thank you for trusting me too." They looked out at the stars. The universe was wide and full of mystery. But for Dan and Lyra, home was where they found trust and friendship, and that was enough.